Okay, so you guys have seen for the last few quizzes that your quiz setup is going to be similar to your review. So the first thing you're going to have to be able to do is factor. Okay, and notice it doesn't say solve, it just says factor. Okay, I'm going to have you guys check your answers for these, but one thing that might be helpful when you get your test, if you want to write out the 3 rules of factoring so that you're already thinking about this GCF, okay, I do recommend that. Okay, for 1A, you should have G plus 6 and G minus 12. What multiplies to a negative has to be opposite. And I'll show you my work for mine in a little bit. I just want you to check your answers first, and then we'll go over questions on those, okay? For B, there's several different answers, and that's because you could have pulled out the negative and then done your factoring to get x minus 8 and x plus 3. Or if you didn't pull out the negative, you could have negative x plus 8 and x plus 3, or you could even have x minus 8 and negative x minus 3. All of those will FOIL back to this trinomial. Okay, for C, you had to take out the GCF. When you're doing these reviews, make sure you're making something that you try visible, okay, even if you get stuck, right? If you can even show, like, you didn't think there was a GCF, you could write that down. You could try to factor with the 64. Just make sure you're making something visible to me. Okay, for D, you should have, it's a T, so 5T plus 12, T plus 3. For E, it's 11A plus 6, 11A minus 6. And then F, 6 goes into all of those. So that GCF is in front. And then this you can write one of 2 ways. All right, so when you are doing these, again, I'm just going to show you my work page for a couple things. You can see with 72, I made a little chart so I could see which one was going to make negative 6. So, and then I'm checking with FOIL. You don't have to write this out, but some of you are visual learners and you're going to need to see that to make sure that you did it correctly. I always do the last 2 in my head. Just make sure if it's a negative, positive times a negative is how you get that. You can't have the same sign. If you decide to take the negative out first here, that changes both of these signs. When you're pulling this out, you're dividing. So you're dividing everything by -1, and then you can factor from there. Multiply to -24, add to -25. When you see that y is in both of those, and again, when you're taking that out, when I say take it out, I mean divide. So 64y cubed divided by y is 64y squared, okay? And then -y divided by y is -1. And then 64 is a perfect square. So we should just be recognizing, hey, if this is a perfect square here, and -1 is a perfect square, I have the difference of 2 squares. Okay, this one, even though these numbers are a little bigger, the only thing that makes 5 is 5 and 1. And then you can make a T-chart for your options. It's either 1 and 36 or 36 and 1, 2 and 18, 18 and 2. So you can check those options until you find the one that adds to 27. Okay, E, perfect square, difference of 2 squares. Doesn't matter if you do the plus first or the minus, you just need both of those. And I want to let you know for F, like you notice 6 went into both. If you're not sure if 6 goes in there, just go ahead and divide it, right? See if 6 goes in there. 6 goes into 16 how many times? Twice. and then you would subtract. 6 goes into 48 8 times. So if it goes in there evenly, you can take it out. Okay, if you don't take out the 6, you could just take out 2 a few times, right? Okay, or well, really take out the 2 and then take out the 3, and you notice the 3 goes in there. That would be another strategy you could use, okay? And then again, this is a perfect square and a perfect square. So when I see it starts and ends with a perfect square and it's a trinomial, I'm always going to try that perfect square trinomial first. And if it doesn't work, then you're going to guess and check. Make your T-charts. Okay? All right. Now, for number 2, it says to find the zeros by factoring. If you are finding the zeros by factoring, you do have to show in your work that you factored completely. And that just means if you have a GCF, that has to come out. So the main 2 things you got to look for are the GCF and the special patterns. Okay, and again, it's because it says to do that by your factoring. Okay, your 2 solutions for A are going to be x equals 0 or negative 5. You just put a comma, that's fine. Oopsies. I'm just going to have you check your answers first, and then we're going to go over that. Okay, and then for B, you should have x equals negative 1/3 or negative 4, and C is x equals negative 76. Okay, so let's talk about how to start A. So when you are finding the zeros of the function, if this starts with f of x equals, this is the same thing as 0 equals 3x squared plus 15x. For some reason, this tends to throw people for a loop. Okay, that's why I'm recommending, hey, write down your factoring steps. The first thing is to take out the GCF. If this has an x and this has an x, they're only 2 terms. You got to take the x out. And then 3 goes into both of those. So divide. 3x squared divided by 3x, 15x divided by 3x. And then the all work that you have to show means you're setting up 2 equations. 3x equals 0 or x plus 5 equals 0. Okay, this step is needed. This is the zero product property. So on your test, this will be part of your rubric. Okay, can you factor? Did you set it up? Did you solve? Okay, the solving part, I'm okay if you just write x equals 0 from here. I'm okay if you just write x equals negative 5 from here. But if you're somebody that you know, like works too quickly sometimes and makes those small arithmetic errors, then you might want to write it out. Okay, and then we have our final answer on the line. This says find the zeros. That's the same thing as solving. Okay, so you have to make sure you have your solutions for x. For B, in order to solve, we want to get everything on one side. So we're going to add 4. And then we're going to factor. So when you guys are factoring and there's no GCF and you don't have any perfect square to start and end, you do have one to end, not to start though. Do you guys always start with asking yourself what times what is 3x squared? That should be your first question, right? This is the only way to multiply to 3x. My options to get 4 are 1 and 4, 2 and 2. So I really don't have a lot to guess and check. I want to get to 13. I want to put this 4 here, so I have 12x. Positive and a positive means these are both positive. So 1x plus 12x is 13x. Yes, it is. And then you just have to do this step here. Don't forget this step. So double check right now that you have on your paper the zero product property. And then I'm okay if you jump from this to this. Okay? And then again, if know yourself, right? If you need to write out those steps, please do that. And then you write your final answer on the line. X is negative 1/3 or negative 4. Okay, either order. All right, and then there have been some where we factored right away on this side, but those directions will say use the square root property. Okay, if you're trying to factor, you want everything on one side, and then once you do that, you have a perfect square. So it's 6x and 6x. This is what I would try because a perfect square to perfect square. And then I would just check. You have, 42x, which equals 84x, so yay. And then you can write it like this, or you can set each one equal to 0. It doesn't matter. When you square root 0, you get 0 anyway, and then you divide. Okay, and that's why you only have one solution here, because you have the same value twice. All right, let's see how the back went. Okay, so one thing you're really going to have to pay attention to are the directions. The directions are your friend, because if it says use the square root property, you have to know what that is and how to use it. When you're using the square root property, this should say to you that you can factor with a perfect square trinomial. Perfect square trinomial is what that should tell you. So that when you're factoring this, right, we can just go, oops, sorry. You can see what my brain was thinking, right? So 12 times 12 is 144. Okay, and then this has to be negative because it's a negative 24. So if you have x minus 12 squared, I wrote down the 12 there, which is not correct. Okay, so we're going to fix that. And then we're going to take the square root of both sides. Anytime you take that square root, what do you got to remember? Plus or minus. Don't let that get you. Okay, and then you're adding 12. So you have two solutions, 4 plus 12 and negative 4 plus 12. So for this one, you should have 16 or 8. You can write it in any order you want. Okay, and then again, you have a perfect square. So here you have 36, square root of 36 is 6, square root of x squared is x, square root of 1 is 1. Okay, so if I were to FOIL this out, 6 plus 6 is 12, 1 times 1 is 1, 6x times 6x is 36x squared, and then I'm going to take the square root. And I'm not going to be scared that this isn't a perfect square, right? Right. All right, so if we have this number and we have to simplify it, we can do our factor tree. So it's 320. Okay, you can split it up into whatever you want. Some people like just doing the 2 first so that all the numbers are on one side, but you could do 10 and 32, that would be fine. You could cut it in half. So half of 300 is 150, half of 20 is 10. So it would be 160. You could cut that in half. You can cut that in half. You can cut that in half, and again, and again. And then once you do that, remember, it's a group of, it's a pair that comes out. Okay, so a group of 2 2s, because 2 times 2 is 4. What's the square root of 4? 2. That comes out. Another group of 2, that comes out, and we multiply it. Another group of 2, that comes out and we multiply it. 5 is all by itself. Has to stay inside. Okay, so 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. So it's 8 root 5. Okay, you could also break this down into 64 times 5. It's an option. And then we subtract the 1 over. So you have negative 1 plus or minus 8 root 5. And then your last step is to divide by 6. When you divide by 6, divide both of these by 6. So you can reduce. So it's x is negative 1/6 plus or minus what goes into both 8 and 6. 2. So it's going to be 4 root 5 divided by 3. Okay, that's one that you're going to want to take step by step. You always want to make sure that you reduce where possible. So if there's a common factor, divide by that common factor. Okay, and then for 4, all of these are completing the square. If you solve them using another method, you will not get points for it. Not that you can, other than something that I haven't taught you yet. You know, some of you know it. I'll do that later this week. Okay, so let's see how these went. We're completing the square. So -6 plus or minus 4 root 3. 5 over 2 plus or minus 2 root 2. And then anytime there's a negative under the radical, we are going to have to bring in our buddy I. Okay, so when you are completing the square, x terms together, constant on the other side. Okay, you have to know the b over 2 squared, right? So half of 12 is 6. 6 squared is 36. Here you're going to factor. X plus 6 squared is equal to 48. You take the square root, and then you simplify. What's the perfect square in 48? Do you guys know it? It's 16. It's 16 times 3, so it's 4 root 3. If you don't know it, it's okay. Use your factor tree. Then your last step is to move over the 6. Okay, for B, if you are doing completing the square, what does your A value have to be? 1. So your A value has to be 1. Okay, so your first step, if A is not 1, is to divide. Please do not forget this, or the whole problem is going to be incorrect. Okay, I can give you partial credit if you can get this step. Okay, so x squared minus 5x minus 7/4 equals 0. Divide everything. So that is your first step. X squared minus 5x plus blank equals, add this over. Okay, don't just move it over without thinking about the addition. And then half of this squared. -5 over 2, and then we square it. So you have to know your fraction rules. You square the top, you square the bottom. What you do to one side, you do to the other side. X minus 5/2 squared is going to equal, and then, oh, isn't that part nice, the 32 over 4? What's 32 divided by 4? Yep. So you can just simplify that. If you took the square root here, if you took the square root there, you could do that, and you would just simplify over 4 and have to reduce. That's fine too. Okay, so take the square root of both sides, plus or minus 2 root 2, square root of 4, simplifies, and then add over your 5/2. And we put our answer there. Okay, and then for C, again, first step, gotta have your A value equal to 1. So divide to get there. X squared plus 3 over 2x plus 2 equals 0. Okay, and then we talked about this earlier this week. Dividing by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/2. Okay, so this is 3/4 squared. Here you have 9 over 16. So on this side, we can just factor. On this side, we're going to get a common denominator. So I have -32 plus 9 over 16. Okay, so when you get the -32 plus 9, what did you get underneath this radical? -23. And if you want to add 10 and then subtract the 1, you can do that too. And then we're going to take the square root. when you take the square root of a fraction, you square root the numerator and the denominator. And this was a perfect square. So it's I root 23 over 4. And then we're just going to move that over. You can also write your answer as, did some of you write the 23 over 4 with the I in the middle? That is fine too. Okay, but the I cannot be underneath your radical. Okay, so that's why a lot of times you'll see it in front. Okay, for 5A, we are writing these in vertex form using the completing the square method. If you guys want to use highlighters on your test, you can. For things like this, you do have a lot of directions, so that can be helpful. So this is x squared plus 6x plus blank plus 14 plus blank. So you do half of b squared, so 3 squared. If you add 9 here, you have to subtract it here. Okay, and really, that's all the work that you need to show. And then when you're writing this on your answer line, 14 minus 9, you guys got 5. Okay, and then just a reminder, these should be opposites. Your axis of symmetry and your vertex. Vertex is -3, 5. Axis of symmetry has to have x equals. If you don't have x equals, you're not going to get full credit because it's a line. Need x equals because it's an equation of a line. That's why you need it. Okay, it's not like you're solving. And then you have one more blank here. Well, the directions say you're finding the vertex and you have to determine if it's a maximum or a minimum. So if the A value is positive, it opens upward. That's going to be a minimum. Okay, if you have a value that is not 1, you have to factor that out. So divide. 6x divided by -3 is -2x. And you only take it out of the x values because that is what you're using to complete the square. So half of -2 squared. Okay, this is a positive 1, but remember you have to distribute. So if you distribute the -3 to the 1, you subtracted 3. So here you have to add 3. So those should be opposites. When you write your final answer, don't forget your equation. So it's f of x equals, that needs to be part of it. The -3 stays on the outside. Okay, we're going to factor into x minus 1 squared plus 15. I always like to do my vertex first because my axis of symmetry is just the x coordinate of my vertex. And if I have a negative, that means I'm going to have a maximum. Okay, so please double check that you have an equation, that you have axis of symmetry as an equation for your final answer.